Good morning. Welcome to Pipes and Poetry. Welcome back here to my garage where we are going to talk about some poems, or today a poem. Today we're going to talk about Walt Whitman, specifically the first part of Song of Myself. Song of Myself is a long poem. Um, we're only going to talk about a short part of it, the first. I've heard people call them cantos, or I'm just going to call it a section, the first section. I forget how many sections it has. It's quite a few. It's a long poem. Uh, some would consider the American epic. Uh, Walt Whitman was American, uh, overly American, um, or not overly, adequately, outwardly American. Some would consider him the American poet, um, possibly. Not that it's competition, but he's definitely up there. I think he's the best-selling American poet, both internally in America, in the United States, and probably worldwide. Um, I think I heard that. Don't quote me on that. Um, he was born in 1819, died in 1892. Uh, so lived to a ripe old age. So I will probably get more into Walt Whitman's biography later when we do, and I'll probably do more of the sections of Song of Myself. But I just wanted to give this little snippet of Song of Myself and a little intro to Walt Whitman. So as we talk about other poets, we can sort of refer to Whitman. He was, I think, born on Long Island, New York. Lived around that area his entire life. But let's get to the poem. It's short, and the thing about Walt Whitman poems is it's not really a lot of what I'd call detective work needs to be done. It's pretty straightforward um, poetry. There are some ideas though that I think capture his sort of outlook on poetry and life in general that are pretty important and come out in this at the beginning of this poem. So let's take a look at it. So I'll read through the whole thing since it's relatively short. It says, or the poem says, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad, I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check, with original energy. All right, so the tone of the poem, he's celebrating himself. I think Whitman looked at the human being as being a part of nature, um, and definitely a participant in nature. And from the beginning here seems like he wants to celebrate that, as in his self. And he doesn't say his body or his mind or his whole self. Whitman definitely could be considered a poet of the body. He got in a little trouble for being a little, I guess, too racy for the times and things that he described. He will describe all parts of the body, or use them in imagery for his poems. And we may see some of that later on. So I celebrate myself and sing myself. What does it mean to sing yourself? I mean, as a poet, poets often, we've seen before, if you've followed along in the previous poems, I think from Thomas and Keats, definitely Yeats in Byzantium speaks of the song of the birds, and his song as being a poet. So that's where he's starting. That's the starting point for the entire, like I said, so almost could be considered an epic poem. Is he celebrates himself and sings himself. And we'll see, he's not singing to God or a god or about any power or something above himself. He sings of himself as if his self is the sort of higher being, maybe highest being. I know, I'm not sure about I did read his religious status. I don't think religion played a big part in his life, at least not later on. I think, it was a part of everybody's life in early United States history to some extent. But he's definitely not a religious poet, like maybe Dante or someone like Hopkins. He's not. This is definitely not like the Hopkins Windhover poem, to Jesus Christ our Lord. There's no dedication like that here. And it seems, it may seem a little arrogant, right? He's taking on himself. The next line, especially, and what I assume you shall assume. That could be looked at as pretty arrogant. He is saying, what he assumes you shall assume. Now, some connection issue, I guess. Anyway, assume. This rusty yellow circle. What I assume you shall assume. Now, it sounds like, at least on first reading, to me it was, the assumptions I make, you shall make those same assumptions. Whether it be, and it seems like he's talking about, the big idea, the big, big things such as the universe, the world, humanity in itself, life. So from that, he says, what I assume you shall assume. But assume could mean, it has several meanings. One is to make assumptions, you can make assumptions before you form a theorem or hypothesis or something like that, whatever the scientific term is. But you can make assumptions in mathematics before you start to solve a problem, things that you assume to be true before you start. Now, it could have that meaning, but also to assume could mean to put on. You can assume power. You can assume an outlook. A particular, can assume the position for something like that. So I think it carries the weight of that, in that not necessarily I'm going to make you think like me, but and maybe this means, like, from the beginning of the poem, because this is setting up the poem. This is the first two lines. From what he assumes, you're going to assume throughout this poem, or the outlook he has, you're going to take on as you read this poem. But he explains it a little bit. He says, "For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." Now, this is getting into sort of one, the use of the term atom. I mean, this was, I want to say, 1853 is the date of this poem. I could be wrong about that. Now, he revised these a lot. There's a lot of different editions. I don't know the specific outline of what was changed where and all of that. That's something you can, feel free to get into. But I do know he was constantly working on the poem. This was included in a book he put together called Leaves of Grass. Leaves of Grass had other poems, and Leaves of Grass changed from the time he first self-published it up until literally at his death. He was working on it like the day before, the week before, something like that. So, but science is, people are in that time period are starting to read about science and learn things about science. Now, the idea of the atom has been around since, Greek times at least, or maybe before, maybe not in the current sense that we understand atoms, but atomism, or the idea that small particles make up everything. And what he says is sort of a outlook of, we're all in this together sort of thing. We're all made of stardust, as I think Carl Sagan said, that when the earth formed, all these atoms were here. Your atoms are made up of atoms the ancestors, we are, and also sort of points to the idea that, we are natural beings again, because we're made up of the same thing that nature's made up of. Trees are composed of carbon and oxygen and stuff like that. Human bodies composed of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, same as fish and whatever. But he says that my atoms belong, every atom that belongs to me also belongs to you as well. So it's like a shared experience. You could look at it that way. Then he goes on to say, "I loaf and invite my soul." Now, I think loafing was a big part of Walt Whitman's life, at least from what I read. He liked to laze around in the grass. He named his book "Leaves of Grass." Now, there's he actually talks about the summer grass here, which is where he's wanting to laze around in or loaf in. But loafing gives him the ability to create. He's not working. He's not worrying about his problems. Maybe he's loafing, and he invites his soul. Well, where does he invite it? He doesn't really say. He says, "I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass." So I think for simplicity, maybe, just his creative process is what I think of, is when he says he invites his soul to begin this creative process. Is how I look at it. I don't know. Maybe there's other ways of looking at it. But he does, if he can invite his soul, there's an idea that, so he's a poet of natural beings, but while we may be natural beings, maybe the soul is something different. Now, I don't think he puts a lot of weight on that, at least from what I've read and things we'll see later. I think he definitely thinks of the human as I think he thinks there is something there, like a consciousness. He's definitely a humanistic poet, I believe. So there would be logic in considering the soul or your consciousness to be separate. And then he says, my tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air. So the tongue is key. It's the only body part here because he says tongue and then every atom of his blood. So tongue and blood. I think he would mean his whole body, but specifically his tongue because that's the tool, the device of poetry. Before the days of the written word, that's how Homer created poetry, or how biblical verses were handed down orally. So the tongue is very important to a poet. But he does say they're formed, talk about their origin. And again, like we said, it's formed from this soil and this air. So again, back to the atoms that make him up are natural things. The human being is a natural thing. Can be looked at in the same way, you would look at a bird or a fish. Now he does get in. This is always been a little strange to me. He says, born here from, or born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. Now this gets into his lineage, I guess he would say, and I don't know if he's one. I don't know how to spell lineage, but two, it gets maybe establish. It seems like maybe establishing some sort of authority, but I don't know. He doesn't seem to me to be the type of person that would look down on an immigrant, someone who is a first generation here or just came over off the boat. I think it may have more to do with, and I don't put words in his mouth at all, but I think it may have something to do with the idea, especially since it's tied so close to this form from this soil and this air, is that his ancestors, or at least immediate ancestors, are in this soil and this air, and so he comes from that. That as they are buried and decay, and he's born of atoms that result from that. You could look at that. He does have some sort of controversial history concerning the Native Americans. He worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He didn't always have the nicest thing to say about slaves or the indigenous people. Now, he was a northerner and was on the side of the North during the Civil War. The Civil War impacted him greatly. He was a big fan of Abraham Lincoln. So I'm not getting into judging him on what he did or what his outlook was at the time. But I do think this is not necessarily, this lineage here is not necessarily to point to look down on, first generation or maybe just a second generation person. I think it's pointing more toward this being he's from the soil and the air that is here. Take it how you will. Look at it, read some more Walt Whitman, and see if what you get out of that. And we will read more Walt Whitman. But next he says, I now 37 years old in perfect health begin. So 37, I don't know if that's an important number or something. I do. There is a lot that happens in literature in people's 30s. I noticed this when I was in college. I was studying Julian of Norwich, who was a religious writer, I think I want to say the 1600s, maybe earlier. And she had another very common thing for poets and writers. She had like this near-death experience where she was really sick on her deathbed. She claimed, I think she had some religious experience and then wrote about it. She was 33. If you remember, Jesus was 33. supposedly, I guess, when he was crucified. And then if you think of Dante, he starts the very opening lines. I think it's the opening lines of Divine Comedy of the Inferno is midway on our life's journey. So something about being middle aged or right in the middle of life. I don't know if he's trying to convey that here, but it's important for him here to tell you how old he is and that he's in perfect health. He's not claiming to be sick. But he says he hopes to cease not till death. And this is, like I said, he didn't. He kept on going. At least as far as the records show, he was editing his poems and I think even writing poems up until pretty late, but definitely doing poetry right up until he died. And this next part, I think, is what sets up the rest of the songs, or Song of Myself, which we'll look at. And I would do more, but I am trying to get these things to be shorter after my last one. If you look at what was it? The Dylan Thomas one went for like 52 minutes. It's crazy. It's insane. It shouldn't have gone for that long. Maybe I should have broken it up, and maybe that's what I will do. But anyway, this next part sets it up, and if I do go on, I will probably refer back to this. But it says, creeds and schools in abeyance. Now, abeyance, if you don't know, means to stop, but it also carries this notion of temporarily. So he's going to put aside creeds, which are religious, I think, writings, but it's basically, I think he means his religious ideas, his ideas of maybe of God and the supernatural and the things he's been taught in school, even. All of these things, he's going to put that on hold for a while. And as we see, he's just going to experience. And this is a lot of what Whitman does. Because he says, retiring back a while, again, you get this sort of idea of loafing or lazing around, lying around, just taking everything in, maybe. Retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, or I guess he's retiring, this is referring to the creeds in the school, I believe. Retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are. I mean, they're sufficient for what they are, and he's not saying that, at least he's not coming out now saying that he's discounting them permanently, just for now. And he even says, but never forgotten. You can't, whether you're religious or not, especially at this time, you can't forever retire them or not. You can't retire your school learning. You can't retire the idea that you live in a society that at the time may have been predominantly Christian and didn't want you to do things that weren't viewed as Christian. And this comes into play a little bit with his sexuality, which was in question. He was actually disparaged for being a homosexual at one time. Now, a lot of people think he was. Some say it's not clear. I'm not here to make that judgment on him, whether it's good or bad. I don't care either way. If he was, if he wasn't, I hate that he would have been persecuted for it, or that he had to go through what he had to, if he were, or that he had to hide it. It would have been a horrible way to live. But those are questions that for scholars, to debate. But anyway, he lives in this society. He can't retire them forever, these creeds and these schools. He lives in these ideas and these worlds that require at least acknowledgement of them. So he says, but never forgotten. And he goes on to say, I harbor for good or bad, I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check with original energy. Nature without, without check, and I think this is what he was getting to the whole time. He's getting rid of his preconceptions of, God created the world, Adam and Eve, all of that, sin and Cain and Abel, and all of that. The biblical teachings, um, his school teachings, and nature without check, meaning that he's going to experience, take into bodily, his the nature that he's experiencing right now as he's laying around looking at a spear of summer grass. Um, Whitman did like to swim and lay around naked. That's pretty well documented. He claimed that swimming naked was, the closest you could get to nature, something like that. So he was all about experiencing it completely, his whole body. Now, the most curious words in the poem, I think, are, let's do green. What's this original energy about? We talked about atoms a couple times earlier. Atoms are associated with energy. I don't know if he knew much about how. I definitely probably didn't know how atomic energy worked, but I definitely probably thought there was something there, that the atoms probably contained something within them that gave life. That allowed the birds to fly. The atoms they were made up of provided them with something. But original energy, that's the curious part. It could be, just nature in general. It could just be another word for nature. Original energy. All the energy comes from nature. However you look at it, even if you take a religious output, man was made from dirt, or clay, or whatever the Bible says. In certain cases, and we may actually talk about that. I think of doing a little string of things you need to know from the Bible to, that help you when you read poems. Specifically English poems, because English poems are predominantly written by people that are influenced by Christianity for the most part, as far as the the popular English writers. Judaism also. But anyway, there is, if you what's curious is that a lot of people are affected by, at this time, even today, this idea, especially in Catholic religion, this idea of original sin. Now, I'm not going to say he's claiming that he's going to do something different. He has gotten rid of his creeds here. At least he's put them on hold for a while. The schooling he's taught, and I think maybe original energy just points to the outlook he has, that as he's going to approach writing this poem. He's going to experience nature, as he says, without check and with original energy. I think this points back to his being in perfect health. So he has the energy, and maybe it is the energy of a young person, maybe looked at like that, original. It's questionable, many ways of looking at what original energy is, but it's not original sin. So it's looking at it maybe in a different way than the creeds, have taught him, or have taught, citizens around him. So one way of looking at it, again, this is a very small part, but this is the opening setup of Song of Myself, and gives us a little idea of the way Whitman approached poetry. A lot of his poems will contain these ideas, and we'll probably, before I get, or I'm not sure, but it's definitely possible before I get into more of Song of Myself, I may actually do some of his, smaller complete poems, like when what is it? When the lilacs in the dooryard last bloomed, or something like that. That's a pretty good poem that stands alone. That maybe we can take a look at to further sort of experience Walt Whitman and his original energy, uh, whatever that may be. So that's been all for today, or that will be all for today. Like the video if you liked it. Please subscribe if you desire. Again, I'm trying to put out one a week. Going pretty well so far. We'll see. Now, I may put out a couple extras. Again, like I said, I kind of want to give a background because everybody is not familiar with the Bible and the stories and the ideas in there, and some of them are not necessary, but they help gain a perspective on reading some of these poems. Now, you don't have to be religious. I am not religious, and I'm not going to preach to you. I don't accept any authority from the Bible, and I disagree with anyone who wants to put that authority on me or enforce something on me because it's written or they interpret it to be from there. So it won't be that. It won't be preaching to you. It will be, and also the Bible. I mean, they call them verses, right? It's not necessarily poetry like Shakespeare, but there's poetic quality to it. I imagine a lot of it, if you could read it in the original, either the Hebrew or the Greek, depending on if you're talking Old Testament or New Testament, there would probably be something to it. I can't do that, unfortunately. I can't read any other language, a little French here and there, but a little Spanish, but no. But it's worth knowing some things about it. So I might throw those in as extras. So look for those if some people start watching and they start reading these, and just know that will be coming. All right. So this has been Pipes and Poetry. Appreciate you watching and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.